The dust of FOB Kestrel's perch was a living entity. It was a fine, pale grit that coated everything. The HESCO barriers, the razor wire, the faces of the soldiers who called this desolate Afghan valley home. It tasted of alkali and exhaustion. Into this world of beige and muted green walked Master Sergeant Anya Sharma. She was 48 years old, with strands of silver woven through her dark hair, pulled back in a tight, regulation bun. A thin, silvery scar traced a delicate path from the corner of her left eye down to her jawline, a permanent, silent question on her face. She carried a single duffel bag and a long, hard-sided rifle case, the latter of which earned more than a few curious glances. Her orders assigned her to this joint operations base as the new Ordnance and Supply NCO, a glorified clerk, in the eyes of the infantrymen watching her cross the sun-scorched yard. Her boots made soft, crunching sounds on the gravel as she headed for the command tent. A group of specialists, lean and cocky in their dusty fatigues, were lounging near the entrance, cleaning their weapons. Their conversation, loud and performative, quieted as she approached. Their eyes raked over her, noting her rank, her age, the scar. The one in the center, a young man with bulldog shoulders and a swagger that seemed too big for his uniform, was Specialist Rourke. He spat a stream of tobacco juice near her boots, a deliberate miss that was somehow more insulting than a direct hit. "Well, look what the V-22 dropped off," he drawled, not bothering to lower his voice. "They sending the grandmothers to the front lines now." His companions snickered. Anya's gaze didn't waver from the tent flap. She kept walking, her posture straight, her pace unaltered. Her lack of reaction seemed to irritate Rourke more than any retort could have. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Master Sergeant," he called out, his tone dripping with mock respect. "You lose your hearing back in the big one? World War II? Was it?" Anya stopped. She turned her head slowly, her dark eyes settling on him. They were calm, steady, and held a depth that made the heat of the valley feel suddenly cold. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, a long, unblinking assessment that stripped away his bluster layer by layer. The snickering from his friends died. After a few seconds that stretched into an uncomfortable eternity, she turned and entered the command tent. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and overworked electronics. Colonel Davies, a man whose face was a roadmap of stress and impatience, looked up from a bank of monitors. He was in his early 50s, but the command of this isolated outpost had aged him a decade. His eyes swept over Anya, taking in her rank insignia and then dismissing her just as quickly as the grunts outside had. "Sharma?" he grunted, not bothering to stand. "You're the new quartermaster. Took you long enough." "My flight was diverted, sir," Anya said, her voice even and low. "Weather over the Hindu Kush." "Excuses." Davies waved a hand dismissively. "The depot's a mess. The last guy was a slug. I want a full inventory audit and a reconciliation report on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. The ammo counts are a disaster. Don't screw it up." There was no welcome, no offer of a briefing, just a task delivered with the warmth of a drill instructor. It was a clear signal of her place in the base's hierarchy, a support role necessary but invisible. She was here to count bullets, not to be a soldier. "Yes, sir," she said. She spent the rest of the day in the Ordnance Depot, a series of interconnected steel shipping containers that baked under the relentless sun. The place was, as Davies had said, a mess. Crates were mislabeled, ammunition pallets were stacked precariously, and the inventory logs were a fantasy novel of wishful thinking. Anya worked with a methodical silence that was almost unnerving. She didn't complain. She didn't sigh. Her hands, surprisingly nimble and strong, moved with an efficiency that bordered on art. She lifted heavy crates of 556mm rounds as if they were bags of groceries. She organized mortar shells by type and lot number, her fingers tracing the stenciled markings with a practiced familiarity. Rourke and his cronies made it a point to pass by the open depot doors several times that afternoon. Their mockery was a constant, buzzing irritant. "Hey, Sarge, careful you don't break a hip lifting that," Rourke shouted, watching her hoist a box of grenades. Later, as she was meticulously counting 50 caliber rounds, he sauntered over, leaning against the doorframe. You know, my mom's about your age. She runs a book club, he grinned. What do you ladies talk about? The best way to stack MREs. Anya continued her count, her lips moving silently. 98, 99, 100. She made a neat tick mark on her clipboard and started a new row, her focus absolute. Her refusal to engage was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and it fueled his aggression. He saw her silence not as strength, but as weakness. He saw her age not as experience, but as decay. He saw her scar as a mark of victimhood. Where'd you get that anyway? He asked, his voice turning meaner. He gestured toward her face. Paper cut from a supply manifest, go bad. Anya paused her counting. She placed the heavy round she was holding back into its case with deliberate care. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his once more. There was no anger in them, only a profound weariness, as if she were looking at a misbehaving child. Go police your sector, specialist, she said, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. It wasn't a suggestion. For a moment Rourke was taken aback. The tone was not what he expected from the quiet supply clerk. But his ego quickly reasserted itself. He sneered, pushing off the doorframe. Whatever you say, Grandma. Just make sure you have my ammo ready when the real soldiers need it. He walked away, laughing with his friends. Anya watched him go, her expression unreadable. Then she turned back to her work, the rhythmic click of bullet casings the only sound in the sweltering container. The sun set, painting the mountains in hues of blood and rust, and still she worked, bringing order to chaos in the silent, thankless dark. She had a job to do. That was all that mattered. The next morning at 0755, the report was on Colonel Davies's desk. It was 20 pages long, handwritten in neat, block letters. It detailed not only the inventory discrepancies but also identified critical shortages in specific munitions and suggested a more efficient layout for the depot to expedite access during a crisis. Davies scanned it, his eyebrows rising slightly. The report was more thorough than any he'd ever received from a logistics NCO. He grunted, a sound that could have been surprise or annoyance, and tossed it onto a pile of other paperwork without a word of acknowledgement. Anya's dismissal continued, settling into the daily routine of the FOB. To the infantry squads, she was just the supply lady, the old woman who managed the depot. Rourke, emboldened by the lack of consequence, escalated his campaign of petty harassment. One morning, the lock to her personal footlocker was filled with epoxy. Another day, the tires on the small forklift she used were deflated. Each time, Anya dealt with the problem silently. She spent 2 hours carefully drilling out the ruined lock. She found a manual pump and refilled the tires herself, her arms working with a steady, tireless rhythm. Her stoicism was a mystery. The younger soldiers, who lived in a world of loud talk and quick tempers, couldn't comprehend it. They mistook her patience for passivity, her silence for fear. Rourke was the most vocal proponent of this theory. She's scared, he announced to his squad in the mess tent, his voice loud enough for Anya, sitting alone a few tables away, to hear. She knows she's just a paper pusher who got a pity assignment to get her pension. One loud noise and she'll fold like a cheap tent. Anya continued to eat her powdered eggs, her gaze fixed on the plastic tray. Inside, she felt a familiar, cold stillness settle over her. It was a feeling she hadn't known for years, a state of hyper-aware calm she had once relied on to survive. The noise, the insults, the petty cruelties, they were all just data points, environmental factors to be observed, analyzed, and filed away. They didn't touch the core of her. Her only refuge was late at night, in the quiet solitude of the depot. After her official duties were done, she would unlatch the long rifle case she'd brought with her. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a standard-issue weapon. It was a heavily modified State Route 25, its barrel and scope bearing the marks of years of meticulous care. She would disassemble it, cleaning each component with a surgeon's precision. The smell of gun oil, the familiar weight of the cold steel in her hands, the satisfying click of the bolt carrier group sliding home. This was her ritual, her connection to a life she had tried to leave behind. It was a language she understood better than words. One afternoon, Colonel Davies stormed into the depot, his face flushed with anger. "Sharma, where the hell are the guidance chips for the javelins? My fire teams are reporting they're missing from the arms room." Anya didn't look up from the crate of smoke grenades she was labeling. "They're not missing, sir. They're in climate-controlled storage Unit 4, as per regulation." "Regulation? I need them accessible, not tucked away in some damn box. The ambient temperature in the arms room exceeds the maximum specified for the chip's circuitry, sir," Anya stated calmly. "Extended exposure would degrade their reliability by an estimated 30%. Unit 4 is insulated and maintains a stable temperature. I can have a case of chips delivered to any platoon in under 3 minutes." Davies stared at her, momentarily speechless. He was used to NCOs who followed orders, not ones who quoted operational parameters of sensitive electronics. "You're telling me you moved critical missile components without clearing it with me?" "I was following the technical manual storage protocols, Colonel," Anya replied, finally meeting his gaze. "Your predecessor authorized the move. It's in the depot log. I assumed you'd read it." The barb, delivered in a perfectly neutral tone, hit its mark. Davies's face tightened. He knew he hadn't read the log. He had dismissed it as clerical nonsense. He was a combat commander, not a supply clerk. "Just make sure they're ready," he snapped, turning on his heel and stalking out. The encounter did little to improve his opinion of her. In his mind, she wasn't just an old woman. She was a pedantic, by-the-book bureaucrat. A hindrance. The only people on the FOB who didn't seem to share this assessment were the quiet professionals of the JSOC task force. A unit of around 50 operators they kept to themselves in a separate section of the base. They were ghosts, moving with a silent purpose that set them apart from the regular infantry. They rarely interacted with anyone, but Anya noticed their eyes on her sometimes. As she crossed the yard, she would catch a glimpse of one of them. A bearded man cleaning a rifle, a wiry operator checking a drone feed, and they would give her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. She would return it just as discreetly. It was a silent conversation, a recognition that passed unnoticed by everyone else. Rourke noticed it too, and it infuriated him. He couldn't understand why these elite warriors would acknowledge the depot clerk. Contradicted his entire worldview. His harassment took a more threatening turn. He started accidentally bumping into her in the narrow corridors between containers, using his size to try and intimidate her. He'd corner her, getting too close, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "You think you're something special, don't you?" he hissed one evening as she was locking up the depot. He blocked her path, the setting sun casting his shadow over her. "You and your secret agent friends over there." He jerked his head toward the JSOC compound. "You're just an old, washed-up relic. And this place breaks relics." Anya stood her ground. She looked at his clenched fists, the tick in his jaw. She catalogued the signs of his instability, his need for dominance. She could smell the cheap energy drink on his breath. "Excuse me, specialist. I need to secure this depot," she said, her voice devoid of fear. Her calm was like gasoline on his fire. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. "One of these days, you're going to need more than your little clipboard to protect you." He held the stare for a long moment, trying to find a flicker of fear in her eyes. He found none. Frustrated, he shoved past her, intentionally knocking her shoulder hard. "Watch your back, Grandma." Anya didn't stumble. She absorbed the impact as if she were rooted to the ground. She watched him storm off into the dusk, then turned and methodically finished locking the heavy steel door. The click of the bolt sliding home echoed in the sudden silence. The pressure was building. The dust of Kestrel's perch seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The crisis arrived without warning, not with a bang, but with a series of soft, deadly thumps. It was just after dawn, the sky a pale, washed-out gray. The first mortar round landed near the western perimeter, a muffled crump followed by a geyser of dirt and shrapnel. Before the alarm klaxons could even begin to wail, a dozen more followed, walking a precise, brutal line straight toward the FOB's vital organs. One round struck the base of the main communications tower. With a groaning shriek of tortured metal, the massive structure twisted and collapsed, taking with it the base's connection to the outside world. Another hit the generator farm, plunging half the base into darkness and silencing the electronic hum that was the constant soundtrack of their lives. Chaos erupted. Soldiers, many still half-dressed, scrambled from their bunks, grabbing weapons and armor. NCOs screamed orders that were lost in the concussive roar of the impacts. The enemy was smart. This wasn't a random barrage. It was a targeted, surgical strike designed to decapitate and disorient. Colonel Davies was trapped in the command tent, which was now running on emergency battery power. The screens in front of him were a sea of static and NO signal warnings. He barked into a radio handset, his voice tight with desperation. All call signs, this is Kestrel 6. Report status. What's your sit rep? Over. The only reply was the crackle of an empty channel. His intelligence feed was blind. His command network was shattered. He was trying to fight a war with his eyes poked out. Specialist Rourke, for all his bluster and bravado, was faltering. The reality of a coordinated attack was vastly different from the chest-thumping stories he told in the mess hall. He and his squad were pinned down near the southern gate by a storm of heavy machine gun fire coming from the ridgeline. The air was alive with the angry snap of supersonic rounds passing inches from their heads. "Get on that 50!" Rourke screamed at a terrified-looking private, pointing to the M2 Browning in their sandbagged emplacement. "I can't. They've got it zeroed in," the private yelled back, his face pale under a layer of dust. Every time he tried to raise his head, a fresh burst of fire chewed through the sandbags above him. "Move! That's an order!" Rourke shrieked, his voice cracking, but he himself was pressed so low to the ground he looked like he was trying to merge with it. His authority, built on intimidation and volume, had evaporated under real fire. His squad, sensing his fear, was paralyzed. They were trapped, leaderless, and minutes away from being overrun. The entire FOB was teetering on the brink of collapse. The enemy was exploiting the initial shock, their assault teams already moving toward the breaches the mortars had created. A machine gun nest on the eastern perimeter went silent. Another on the west was reporting that they were almost out of ammunition. The defense was fragmented, a series of isolated pockets of resistance with no central coordination. Amidst the cacophony and panic, one person was moving with a serene, terrifying purpose. Master Sergeant Anya Sharma had been in the ordnance depot, conducting her early morning checks, when the first round hit. The explosion hadn't made her jump. It hadn't even made her flinch. She simply straightened up, her head cocked as she listened to the sound of the incoming shells. The faint, whistling sigh, the pause, the impact. She was calculating. She didn't run for cover. She walked briskly to the depot's main door and slid it open a few feet, peering out at the chaos. She saw the collapsed comms tower, the burning generator, the panicked soldiers. Her dark eyes took it all in, not with fear, but with a cold, analytical clarity. Her mind was processing information, identifying critical failures, and formulating solutions. She turned back into the dim interior of the depot. Her movements were economical, fluid, and utterly precise. While others were consumed by the crisis, she had already moved past it. For Anya, the time for shock was over. It was time to act. She walked past the neat stacks of ammunition and rifles, heading for a specific set of steel lockers at the far end of the container. Her face was a mask of concentration. She was no longer a supply clerk. She was something else entirely. Something the FOB desperately needed and had no idea it possessed. Anya's hands moved with the certainty of long practice. She unlocked a restricted access locker and pulled out a Javelin command launch unit. She checked its battery, her expression grim. Dead. The power outage meant the charging stations were useless. She glanced at the container of guidance chips she had so meticulously stored. They were safe but useless without a functioning launcher. She didn't waste a second on frustration. Her eyes scanned the shelves, her mind a rapid-fire inventory of possibilities. She spotted a crate of older, single-use at 4 rocket launchers. Obsolete against modern armor, but devastating against soft targets. She slung 2 over her shoulder. Next, she went to her own long rifle case. She unlocked it and lifted out the State Route 25. She slid the bolt back, chambered a round from a custom-loaded magazine, and attached the suppressor with a few deft twists. The weapon felt like an extension of her own arm. Stepping back out into the maelstrom, she surveyed the battlefield with a sniper's eye. The dust and smoke provided cover. The screams and explosions were a cacophony that she filtered into useful data. She could hear the distinct, rhythmic thud of the enemy's heavy machine gun that had Rourke's squad pinned. She noted the direction of the fire, the cadence, and the type of weapon. From a different direction, she heard the high-pitched chatter of an RPK, providing covering fire for an assault team. She ignored the immediate, close threats. A good tactician doesn't just plug holes. They eliminate the source of the leak. Her gaze settled on the high ground, a rocky outcrop 200 meters beyond the perimeter fence. It was the perfect command and control position. And it was exactly where the enemy would place their spotters and fire coordinators. While soldiers were hugging the ground, Anya began to climb. She scaled the side of a stack of shipping containers, using the corrugated steel walls as handholds. Her movements were silent and fluid, more like a mountaineer than a soldier's. She reached the top, a flat, exposed platform 10 meters above the chaos of the yard. She lay prone, the metal hot against her body even in the early morning, and deployed the bipod of her rifle. Through her scope, the battlefield resolved into a series of clear, distinct problems. She scanned the ridge line, ignoring the muzzle flashes of the grunts and focusing on what was behind them. Took her 37 seconds. There, a glint of light, not a muzzle flash, but the reflection from an optic. A spotter. She settled the crosshairs on the glint. Her breathing slowed, becoming shallow, almost non-existent. She let out half a breath and held it. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope. She wasn't thinking about Rourke or Davies or the insults. She was in the cold, pure calculus of ballistics and windage. She squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle coughed, a sound lost in the din of the battle. More than 800 meters away, the enemy spotter collapsed, the high-powered optic on his tripod slumping to the side. Before his companion, a man with a radio handset pressed to his ear, could even register what had happened. Anya had already cycled the bolt and acquired her new target. The second shot was just as precise. The radio operator fell silently. The enemy's coordinated fire immediately became sporadic, less accurate. She shifted her attention. A technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun bolted to the bed, was maneuvering to flank the suppressed southern gate. It was the biggest threat on the field, capable of shredding the defense's Rourke squad was cowering behind. It was too far for the AT-4S. Anya slid back down the containers. She moved with purpose toward a damaged Humvee, its front end mangled by shrapnel. Its long-range radio was smashed, but the power supply might still be good. She ripped a power cable from the radio's guts, stripped the ends with her teeth, and sprinted back to the dead Javelin CLU. She jammed the live wires against the launcher's external battery contacts. The unit's screen flickered to life, a desperate, jury-rigged solution that had a 50-50 chance of frying the delicate electronics. But it worked. She grabbed a missile tube, locked it into the now-powered CLU, and shouldered the weapon system. It was heavy, awkward. She ran toward the southern perimeter, using the burning generator as cover. She could see Rourke and his men still pinned, still ineffective. She didn't shout a warning. She didn't ask for permission. She rose from behind a concrete barrier, the Javelin's targeting system whining as it sought a lock. The Technical's gunner saw her. The heavy machine gun swiveled, spitting a stream of tracers that ripped through the air around her. Anya didn't flinch. The targeting tone shifted from a seeking buzz to a solid, high-pitched scream. Lock acquired. She fired. The backblast kicked up a storm of dust and pebbles. The missile shot from the tube, a streak of gray against the gray sky, climbed sharply, then pitched over, plunging down toward its target. The technical tried to reverse, but it was too late. The missile struck the top of the truck's cab, its shaped charge penetrating the thin metal as if it were paper. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, a blossom of fire and black smoke that flipped the vehicle onto its side. The machine gun fire that had terrorized the southern gate ceased instantly. The lull was deafening. In the sudden quiet, the soldiers of Rourke's squad slowly lifted their heads from the dirt. They saw the burning wreck of the technical. Then they saw the lone figure of the master sergeant, calmly discarding the spent javelin tube and walking away as if she had just taken out the trash. The breaking of the enemy assault was as swift as it was unexpected. With their command element eliminated and their heaviest support weapon destroyed, the attackers lost their momentum. Their probing attacks became hesitant, then faltered completely. The FOB's defenders, galvanized by the sudden shift in fortune, rallied. The machine gun nests came back to life. Squads began to counterattack, pushing the remaining enemy fighters back from the perimeter. A fragile quiet descended on Kestrel's perch, punctuated by the crackle of burning wreckage and the distant, fading sounds of retreat. Colonel Davies emerged from the command tent, his face a mask of confusion and relief. His communications were still down, but his eyes told him the immediate crisis was over. He scanned the chaotic yard, trying to piece together what had just happened. His gaze fell upon the figure calmly descending from the shipping containers, a long, unfamiliar rifle slung over her back. It was Sharma, the supply clerk. It made no sense. At that moment, the doors to the JSOC compound slid open. The elite operators, who had been defending their own sector with brutal efficiency, began to emerge. They weren't celebrating. They were assessing, rearming, their movements calm and professional. Their commander, a broad-shouldered man with a gray-streaked beard and eyes that had seen too much, walked out into the center of the yard. His call sign was Stone. Rourke, meanwhile, was staggering back from the southern gate, his face pale with a mixture of terror and shame. His squad followed him, their expressions bewildered. They had been saved, but they didn't know by whom. Then Rourke saw Anya, walking toward the depot. His fear curdled into rage, a desperate need to find a scapegoat, to reassert the dominance he had so spectacularly lost. "You!" he bellowed, his voice raw. He stalked toward her, pointing a shaking finger. "What the hell were you doing? That's not your weapon. That's not your place. You could have gotten us all killed with that stunt." Anya stopped and faced him. She said nothing. Her silence, the same calm impassivity that had driven him to fury for weeks, now seemed to break something inside him. He closed the distance between them and, in a fit of misplaced aggression, grabbed her arm. "I'm talking to you, old woman," he snarled, his grip tightening. "You answer to me." Before another word could be spoken, a voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as breaking glass. "Rourke." It was Stone. He stood 20 yards away, his arms crossed over his chest. Every one of the nearly 50 operators in his task force had stopped what they were doing. They turned, as one, their collective gaze falling on the spectacle of the young specialist manhandling the master sergeant. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't shout. They just watched, and their silent, unified attention was more menacing than any overt threat. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rourke froze, his hand still clamped on Anya's arm. He looked from Stone to the sea of hardened faces staring at him, and for the first time, a genuine primal fear entered his eyes. Stone began to walk toward them, his boots crunching slowly on the gravel. Each step was deliberate, heavy. "Get your hand off Wraith," he said, his voice dangerously low. The name hung in the air, an incomprehensible word that nonetheless carried an immense, terrifying weight. Wraith. Rourke's mouth went dry. He'd heard that name before. Every soldier in Afghanistan had. It was a legend, a ghost story whispered in chow lines and remote outposts. Wraith was a JSOC sniper, a phantom credited with some of the most impossible shots and daring rescues of the last decade. A figure who had supposedly retired, vanished from the field years ago. Stone stopped a few feet away. He looked down at Rourke's hand on Anya's arm, then back up to the specialist's face. His eyes were chips of ice. "Specialist?" Stone said. His voice now barely a whisper, yet it carried across the yard. "You are addressing Master Sergeant Anya Sharma." Her call sign, which you will not use again, was Wraith. She was the lead sniper and reconnaissance element for my unit for 10 years. She holds the official record for the longest confirmed combat kill in this theater, and the unofficial record for 3 others that are still classified. He paused, letting the words sink in. Rourke's grip loosened, his fingers going numb. "That scar on her face?" Stone continued, his voice hardening. "She got that pulling my unconscious ass out of a burning Black Hawk wreckage in the Chronicles Valley, while under heavy fire. She laid down covering fire with her sidearm until the QRF arrived. Every man you see standing here owes his life to her, some of them more than once. She retired from field operations 2 years ago because she decided she'd had enough. Not because the job was done with her. She is a living legend, and you worthless piece of trash, are putting your filthy hands on her." He took one more step forward, his shadow falling over Rourke. "So I will give you one chance. Let go of her arm." Rourke snatched his hand back as if Anya's arm were white-hot metal. He stumbled backward, his face ashen. The bravado, the swagger, the cruelty. It all collapsed, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a man, utterly broken by a revelation he couldn't process. He looked at Anya, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not an old woman, but something ancient and formidable. He saw the truth in the steady calm of her eyes, in the quiet confidence of her posture, in the elegant, deadly line of the scar on her face. The other soldiers who had joined in the mockery now stared at their boots, a wave of shame washing over them. The depot clerk, the grandmother, the paper pusher they had ridiculed, was the ghost they told stories about around campfires. The realization was a physical blow. Colonel Davies had walked over during Stone's speech, drawn by the gravity of the confrontation. He had heard everything. He looked from Stone's granite face to Anya's impassive one. He looked at the custom state Route 25 she carried, at the smoldering ruin of the enemy technical, and at the suddenly quiet ridge line. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. His dismissiveness, his condescension, his utter failure to see what was right in front of him, crashed down on him. He had treated a master warrior like a janitor. He cleared his throat, the sound loud in the tense silence. He stepped forward, standing before Anya, and for the first time, he addressed her not as a subordinate, but as an equal, possibly a superior. "Master Sergeant Sharma," he said, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. It was formal, stiff, but laced with a new, profound respect. "The enemy has pulled back, but they'll be back. My command and control is still shattered. We need to reorganize the defense. We need a new plan." He paused, and the admission cost him dearly, but he made it. "I would appreciate your input." It was the most profound apology he was capable of giving. An open acknowledgement of her skill, a deferral to her experience in front of the entire command. Anya simply gave a short, sharp nod. "Of course, sir." As she turned to walk with the colonel toward the command tent, she passed the assembled men of the JSOC task force. They didn't cheer. They didn't slap her on the back. Their respect was too deep for such loud displays. Instead, as she walked the gauntlet of these elite, hardened killers, each man, from Stone down to the newest operator, met her eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound solidarity, a silent salute between warriors who had shared the crucible of combat. It was a recognition of family. Anya, her face betraying no emotion, returned each nod in kind. Rourke watched her go, a small, insignificant figure in the shadow of a legend he had been too blind to see. He remained frozen in the yard, the quiet judgment of 50 silent operators pinning him in place. Hours later, a semblance of order had been restored to Kestrel's perch. The comms were partially back online, the perimeter had been reinforced, and the wounded had been tended to. A counteroffensive strategy was being mapped out in the command tent. Colonel Davies had listened intently as Anya, using a grease pencil on a laminated map, laid out the enemy's likely avenues of approach, and identified the most effective placements for their remaining heavy weapons. Her analysis was brilliant, incisive, and utterly devoid of ego. She spoke of kill zones and fields of fire with the same dispassionate calm she had used to describe inventory shortages. When the planning session was over, Davies offered her a seat and a cup of coffee, a gesture of inclusion in the inner circle of command. Anya politely declined. She had another duty to attend to. She wasn't in the command tent, and she wasn't in the mess hall being feted as a hero. She was back in the ordnance depot, the doors slid partially shut, granting her a measure of privacy. The only light came from a single battery-powered lantern, casting long, dancing shadows on the steel walls. The air was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of gun oil and solvent. She had field-stripped her State Route 25 on a clean canvas cloth. Her hands moved with a slow, practiced grace, cleaning each intricate component of the weapon. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the finely machined trigger assembly. This was her church, her meditation, a ritual of purification and respect for the tool of a trade she had never truly left behind. Each stroke of the cleaning rod, each wipe of the oiled cloth, was a deliberate act of centering herself, of washing away the adrenaline and the noise, leaving only the quiet focus of the task at hand. She heard the soft crunch of boots on the gravel outside. The shadow of a large figure fell across the doorway. It was Stone. He didn't enter, just leaned against the frame, a steaming metal cup in each hand. He held one out to her. Anya paused her work, wiping her hands on a rag before accepting the cup. It was coffee, black and scaldingly hot. She took a sip, the warmth a welcome shock to her system. "Knew you'd be here," Stone said, his voice a low rumble. It was the first time they had spoken directly since her arrival. "Weapon needs cleaning," she replied, her own voice quiet, almost a whisper. They stood in comfortable silence for a long minute, the only sounds the distant hum of a backup generator and the soft hiss of the lantern. They were two sides of the same coin, warriors who understood that the most important conversations were often the ones with the fewest words. "You didn't have to do that," Anya said finally, her gaze fixed on the disassembled rifle. "With Rourke." Stone took a long drink from his cup. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "Family looks after family. And disrespect has a price." He looked out at the darkening valley. "They'll be back. The ones who ran today will tell their friends they found a soft target. They'll be surprised." "We'll be ready," Anya stated. It wasn't a boast. It was a fact. "I know," Stone nodded. He finished his coffee and placed the empty cup on a nearby crate. "Good to have you back, Wraith." He used the name softly, not as a call sign, but as a term of endearment, a recognition of the part of her that would never truly be a civilian. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her ritual. Anya watched him go, then turned her attention back to her rifle. She picked up the bolt, its surface now gleaming under the lantern light, and began the process of reassembly. The precise, metallic clicks as each part slotted perfectly into place were a kind of music to her. The job was not done. As Stone had said, it never was. But here, in the quiet solitude of her depot, surrounded by the tools of war she understood so intimately, Anya Sharma felt a sense of peace. She was not Master Sergeant Sharma, the supply clerk, nor was she Wraith, the legendary sniper. She was simply a soldier, doing her job, ready for the dawn. And as the first hint of morning light began to trace the sharp peaks of the mountains, it cast the long, solitary shadow of a woman cleaning her rifle, a silent guardian watching over the sleeping base. Her competence needed no audience and her honor no defense. It was simply who she was.